President Biden dropping out of the race and endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris less than a month before the Democratic convention. For more on all this, the next moves for both parties, I want to bring in our panel this morning, former Democratic U.S. Senator Heitkamp. She's now director of the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics, also a CNBC contributor and former Republican. Representative Jeb Hensarling, want to welcome both of you to the broadcast. I'm curious, Senator Heitkamp, you know, you heard the news midday yesterday. I don't know where you were, or you probably remember it for the rest of your life, but what was your initial reaction, and what do you think happens next?
You know, I think it was surprising for me because I actually anticipated that he would eventually get out. The poll numbers were just too bad. But I think I reacted the way most Democrats who appreciate the work that he's done and know his heart and know him well, with sadness. I mean, that this had to happen. But then I think there was immediately a sense of relief that we were turning the page, that the opportunity to run a good campaign, a winning campaign, was back in play. And you saw that reaction. $60 million raising money almost immediately is pretty amazing.
What does it mean, though, real quick, before I get to Jeb, what does it mean that President Obama, Schumer, Pelosi have not endorsed Kamala Harris yet?
I don't think it means anything. I think you saw AOC's video saying basically this was party bosses trying to take over. I think it's smart for those people who were probably most identified with this effort to ask the president to step aside, not to endorse a candidate, not to be the people picking the next standard bearer and bringing it to a broader political establishment. So I think that's what it means. I don't think it's any knock on Kamala.
Jeb Hensarling, how does this change the dynamic in terms of the race? Do you think that Vice President Harris has a good chance against former President Trump?
Well, Andrew, I'd say when you ask how it changes the race, there wasn't a race, and now there is a race. I think that, the vice president's going to have a bunch of positives and a bunch of negatives. Her greatest positive is she isn't President Joe Biden. She's a new face to the Democratic ticket, obviously, in the sense of ascending to the top slot. But she's still not terribly well known. I would say that, number one, she's going to have to tell her own story, have her own narrative, and I think it's going to be a real race to see if the Trump campaign is going to tell her narrative for her, if they're going to define her before she can define herself, which is exactly what President Obama did to Mitt Romney before he could define himself, because President Obama's numbers were so bad. Let's face it, right now, one of the biggest negatives that Vice President Harris has, although she isn't Joe Biden, she has Joe Biden's record around her neck, whether it's be the withdrawal from Afghanistan done in a disastrous way, whether it be particularly inflation. I mean, let's face it, the question for a lot of voters isn't what have you done for me lately. The real question is, am I better off today than I was 4 years ago? And you still have 20% cumulative inflation under Biden-Harris, and wages haven't kept up. And that's going to be kind of a burden for her to bear.
Senator, how does she deal with the immigration story? And then separately, in terms of tacking to the middle or tacking to the left, which way do you think that she goes?
I think she goes to the middle. I think you'll see that signaling in her selection of vice president. And so that'll be interesting. But, you know, this race for the nomination isn't over. You don't see a lot of people jumping up and down, but we do hear rumors that people are looking at this. It will ignite and excite the base, I think. And, you know, there was going to be these problems, whether it's inflation, for any Democrat who steps on the ballot. The one thing that a Republican pollster recently told me is that the only thing people really know about her is her laugh. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is an opportunity for her to redefine herself in the American public. And she's got a pretty interesting and direct narrative to tell. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot of discussion about these issues.
Is there an issue, though, that you think she should create daylight between herself and the current president?
I don't think you can. I think that you can't be embraced by this president. You can't be the vice president and expect to run away from that record. It's like Republicans running away from Trump. It doesn't work if they've stood next to him at a campaign rally. And then we get help, Democrats, from Donald Trump. I mean, could he just have said, goodbye, Joe? I don't like you, but, you know, you serve the country. We don't think very well, but good luck to you. No, he did not turn the page to a kinder and gentler person. And I think that's hurting him and opening opportunities for people like Kamala or whoever the party nominates.
Congressman Hensarling, do you think this makes it tougher for former President Trump in terms of how he debates her, how he potentially approaches criticizing her?
I don't believe so. Number one, if you're alluding to the fact that she's obviously a woman, he's debated a woman before, and obviously he managed to win that particular election. I mean, a couple of things I would agree with Heidi on. I don't know how Vice President Harris escapes or gets any daylight between herself and President Biden. And so she's also stuck, obviously, with the border. And on a lot of the polling I've seen, second only to the economy, i.e. inflation. What's happening on our border, the border crisis, is the number one issue. And guess who the administration put in charge? Vice President Harris. Again, that is a real albatross around her neck. And with respect to President Trump, yeah, I'll admit the new Trump lasted about 72 hours. And so he has a very, very high floor in politics, but, you know, a low ceiling. Right. So there is going to be a real race here. But, you know, we look at polls, they're an inexact science. What's a little bit more exacting, if you look at the Vegas betting odds, they are still betting heavily on Trump.
Senator Heitkamp, you mentioned this idea that there are others waiting in the wings that may emerge in the next couple of days. We've heard about Joe Manchin being one of those potential names. How do you handicap that situation? What are the other names out there that you think are even interesting or would be interested?
You know, it's hard to tell because there was such a quick kind of endorsement and then the kind of follow-on, especially for those people who might want to be named vice president, who would otherwise maybe consider an open primary if that process had been available to them. And so it's really difficult to say. But you know what? This idea that this is all wrapped up, I'd say it's about 80% there, but you never know what could happen. This is now in the hands of 4,000 delegates coming to Chicago in August. And, you know, the enthusiasm and the relief and the fundraising for the Democratic Party, that all signals a rejuvenized, re-energized base. Whether it's enough at this late date to overcome what, in fact, are pretty miserable poll numbers for Democrats in swing states remains to be seen.
We got to run. Just name one person. If you could choose her vice president, who would it be? Both of you.
Oh, Andrew, that's just so tough. I think there's a lot of good choices. I don't know some of them as well as I know, like a Mark Kelly. I think Mark Kelly would be an interesting choice.
Congressman?
I think rarely, if ever, the Veep makes a big difference. Clearly, it's going to be a moderate from one of these swing states. Maybe it should be in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Senator Heitkamp.
Arizona could be back in play.
Congressman Hensarling, thank you both this morning. Appreciate it.